In the early 1970s, Native American fascination had reached one of its most prominent peaks in pop culture. The 60s counterculture hippie movement played a large part in this. Hippies are now notorious for their affinity for nature, communal living, spirituality, and the use of drugs. The hippie movement appropriated traditional Native American clothing and practices to identify with their hippie values. Though most of the hippies' interpretation of Native American culture was greatly mischaracterized and even superficial, often not acknowledging the sacredness and seriousness of many of the practices and clothing they adopted. You can see the influence of the hippie movement in live events like Coachella, where it was common for celebrities and non-celebrities to wear traditional sacred Native American attire. The hippie movement was largely made up of middle-class white young adults. Figures like John Lennon would later become big figures of the movement. In the midst of this upturn of interest in Native American culture, there were real strides made by real Native Americans and civil rights activists for Native Americans. The American Indian movement was formed in 1968 by real Native Americans who were frustrated with poverty and discrimination against indigenous people. The occupation of Alcatraz Islands by Native Americans in 1971 led to the end of the government's policy of terminating Indian tribes and the adoption of a policy of Indian self-determination. In 1973, Sachin Littlefeather was sent by Marlon Brando to decline his Best Actor award for The Godfather and protest how Native Americans were portrayed in the media. From the 30s to the 70s, Hollywood often depicted Native Americans as violent savages. By the 70s, Native Americans began to be portrayed a bit more sympathetically, but it often came at the hands of the white savior complex. Movies obviously weren't the only form of media that took an interest in Native American culture. Music as well. Cher began her career as a hippie, or at least very hippie adjacent, alongside Sonny Bono. As their success grew, their hippie status was debated. Bono on one occasion is quoted saying, "Of course, now the extreme hippies think we're squares, but the squares think we're hippies." Nonetheless, they adopted hippie attire into their brand. This is before Cher would come to be known for her Bob Mackie outfits. After the Sonny and Cher show became a hit, her fashion would evolve. Sonny and Cher were a popular music act, but by the late 60s, music trends had changed and the zeitgeist was no longer in their favor. The Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour debuted in August of 1971, and it instantly became a smash hit, and it breathed new life into both of their careers. In a career full of comebacks, the show helped set the stage for Cher's very first musical comeback. Sonny Bono produced multiple solo Cher albums, most of which didn't move a needle. With a new fire in her career, it was when she stepped outside of the Sony box that her music career would receive its first reinvention. Cher would follow a specific formula for her most iconic 70s hits. This category could be described as melodramatic storytelling songs in which she adopted different cultures and ethnicities. Cher had a striking look, very strong cheekbones, a strong nose, and long black hair. She stood out in her era of Hollywood, and her songwriters sought to capitalize on her look. The very first time this would come into play is with Gypsy, Tramps, and Thieves in 1971, which was not a song about Native Americans. That would come later. This song is from the point of view of a Romany girl. Though not explicitly stated, it is heavily implied, especially with the language and stereotypes used. It could also be argued that the fetishization of exoticism of groups such as Native Americans in pop culture paved the way for a song like this that similarly stereotyped Romany people and monetized a marginalized group that likely wouldn't have had the same opportunity to monetize their own struggle on such a big platform during that time period. The word gypsy is generally associated with two different connotations, and the connotation appears to vary depending on region. One being just a traveler, the second being a derogatory term that has been used to characterize Romany people as evil mystical criminals that are always on the move. The Cher song certainly leans into those stereotypes. The song was written specifically for Cher by Bob Stone. The first line of the song is picturesque. I was born in the wagon of a traveling show. The narrator's mom was an exotic dancer, and her dad was a salesman. The chorus illustrates how the town would call the narrator's family gypsy, tramps, and thieves, and insult them, but by night would be the very people seeking their services and supporting their discouraged businesses. It is implied that one of those businesses is prostitution. In the second verse, the narrator gets pregnant. Picked up a boy just south of Mobile, gave him a ride, filled him with a hot meal. I was 16, he was 21. Rode with us to Memphis, and Papa would have shot him if he knew what he'd done. The narrator's father is a deadbeat, and by the end of the song, the narrator's daughter assumes the life of her mother, and the cycle repeats. It's a pretty thorough story in song form. The song was a hit and became Cher's first solo #1 hit in the US and the UK in the year of 1971. The second installment of Cher's ethnic songs came in 1973 and was also written by Bob Stone. The American single cover features Cher wearing attire akin to the hippie movement, while other versions of her cover show her in a big Native American headdress. It's important to note that this song has a sense of pride in its heritage, but some of the lyrics reveal that it's not even very well informed on Native American tradition. It also shares strong similarities with gypsies, tramps, and thieves. To me, nobody else could do that song but Cher. That was Cher's story. So I held the song and it worked out. Then we got Cher back, but the song sat on my desk for about 3-4 months, Bob Stone said of Half Breed. And although his instincts were certainly right about it being a Cher hit, it definitely was not her story. The song talks about discrimination due to belonging to two different ethnic backgrounds. My father married a pure Cherokee. My mother's people were ashamed of me. The Indians said that I was white by law. The song's chorus echoes her previous #1 hit. Half breed, that's all I ever heard. Half breed, how I learned to hate the word. Half breed, she's no good, they warned. Both sides were against me since the day I was born. The narrator recalls her bullies in the second verse. The other children always laughed at me. Give her a feather, she's a Cherokee. The sense of resistance and pride comes in the very last verse, where she reveals she left home at 19 and that she can't run from who she is. Where the glaringly obvious error that the team behind the song isn't aware of Native American customs and that critics took notice of takes place in the very first verse. In many Native American tribes, but especially the Cherokee tribe, kinship is traced on the mother's side of the family. So if the mother of the child is Cherokee, they are accepted as Cherokee, regardless of what race or ethnicity the father is, meaning the entire premise of the song would have to be reversed for it to actually make sense. She would perform the song for decades in illustrious Native American attire. The final installment of Cher's string of melodramatic ethnic story songs came out the exact same year as Half Breed, except it would top the charts and become her third #1 hit the following year in 1974. This was a tried and true formula for Cher. Her most popular songs and all of her #1 hits from the 70s followed this exact formula. Dark Lady is a personal favorite Cher song of mine. A main reason is because it doesn't feel so serious. The melody is arresting and it has an element of campiness to it that could best be described as a classic movie villain arc. In this song, Cher doesn't take on another ethnicity, instead she takes on revenge. Still, a different ethnicity is in her orbit in this song. The Dark Lady described in this song is a fortune teller from New Orleans. The fortune teller tells her that the narrator's man is cheating on the narrator. Cher describes the scenario in the chorus. Dark Lady laughed and danced and lit the candles one by one, danced to her gypsy music till her brew was done. Dark Lady played black magic till the clock struck on the 12. She told me more about me than I knew myself. The fortune teller, aka the Dark Lady, tells her to leave, never come back, and forget about her. But the epic plot twist in this song is that the narrator remembers the scent of the Dark Lady's perfume being in her home. So she sneaks back to the Dark Lady's place and catches the Dark Lady with her man. In a fit of rage, she kills both her man and the Dark Lady. As the song says, Dark Lady would never turn a card up anymore. This is the type of story that camp pop dreams are made of. It's certainly not as egregious as Half Breed, but it definitely leans into those New Orleans fortune teller tropes. This song concluded Cher's high-profile run in music for the 70s decade. She wouldn't have another #1 hit for 25 years. Cher would continue to wear Native American attire for decades to come. But the real question is Cher actually Native American? No. Her father was Armenian American, and her mother white American. Though Cher does allegedly have a very small percentage of Native American ancestry. According to Cher herself, the superstar claims she was 1/16 Cherokee on her mother's side. Cher obviously used her proximity to visual ambiguity and her standout look as an ethnic gimmick. It is personal capitalization of another culture. It is important to refer back to the Native American political movements that I mentioned in the beginning of this video, because while Cher got to perform these songs on television in traditional Native American attire and be sexy, glamorous, and perpetuate exotic stereotypes aimed at Native American women, the vast majority of Native Americans were not allowed the same opportunities and were fighting for their civil rights, as well as against negative stereotypes of Native Americans in the media. Similar sentiments affected the Romani people, who are also having many uprisings as they continue to face discrimination and stereotypes. Cher has seemed to struggle with some of the questioning regarding songs such as Half Breed. In a heated Twitter discussion, she was quoted saying, "I did this song 50 years ago, and it wasn't meant to be offensive. However, that's kind of a bullshit excuse. Need to retire a beautiful costume and stop singing it. It's way past time. I'm feeling a little tired." She did continue to perform Half Breed on the Australian leg of the Here We Go Again tour in 2018, but by the time that she reached America, it had been retired from the set list. For her 11th Greatest Hits album released in 2024, she omitted Half Breed, which is the first time she omitted a #1 hit from one of her Greatest Hits albums. I do think there is at least a tinge of nuance to be discussed here. It could be argued that songs like Half Breed in particular lent a voice to an untold story, and in return gave the people of those groups a sense of representation and pride. I've also heard that Cher can be viewed as a character in a movie within these songs, but the tricky part is, much like a movie, if she's just assuming a character, then her depiction of such character is also up for debate, especially when they are of another culture. It's not like these groups aren't real people, they are real people with real experiences. Ultimately, I don't think Cher had nefarious intentions with these songs, but if a person of the marginalized group in the song's subject matter finds it offensive, it's their right, it's their culture. I think what it came down to for Cher is a pop gimmick that kept fueling the flame to her career, in the best way possible. She capitalized on being othered due to her appearance by assuming ethnic roles and being othered in her songs. Cher is pretty removed from these songs present day, but it's interesting to look back on what worked in this phase of Cher's career, a career of several phases, and how much culture has shifted since then.